I think in the case of Stellantis, you've seen actually sort of a reluctance for them to lower their guidance. So they did release a very disappointing first half result a couple months back. But the companies that maybe have had a harder time getting a handle on earnings, I would put Volkswagen in that camp. They've had their second warning in the matter of a short period. I think Nissan may be next, as we reported earlier today. I do think that this is a case where automakers globally very quickly went from this position of being production constrained and looking to move as quickly as they possibly could to ramp production back up. And once they were able to get through the many supply chain issues that they've had over the last few years coming out of the pandemic, it really took them some time to adjust to the fact that at some point they were going to get to where they were no longer production constrained, that demand wasn't going to live up to what everyone was making, and it was kind of a matter of who was going to blink first. And I think Stellantis maybe is getting bonked on the head today because they were one of the last to really sort of bow to reality that they had way too much supply relative to the demand that was out there.
So is there a consensus growing here, Craig, about how this industry is going to continue to make this transition to EV? Because it seems like it's slower than maybe they had thought as recently as a year ago, more bumpier. How is this going to play out? Is there any consensus building?
I think there's probably going to be more collaboration. We've heard the CEO of Renault in France call for an Airbus of autos, a coming together of European companies to try and, confront these challenges together. I think you've seen some analysts call for more collaboration among Western companies and Chinese companies. And we're seeing that in Stellantis, right, where they're teaming up with Leapmotor, one of the smaller EV makers in China. But I do think that there are some real limits to that latter strategy, given the sort of appetite for that in Washington, right? I think it's the one thing that's really uniting Republicans and Democrats is this idea that we shouldn't be at all reliant on China going forward, and that they're our enemy and not our friend.
So what I also find interesting is that it's not just China and it's not just EVs. I mean, specifically, Stellantis said Jeep sales. So it's easy to blame China cheap EVs. It's easy to blame the fact that people don't want to buy EVs right now, but that's not necessarily the only problem.
I think that's a really key insight. I think this was a case of mismanagement on Stellantis' part. And you've seen some analysts come out with really sort of harsh words, not only for the way that they've sort of bungled things, but the way they've communicated. Even just last week, the CFO of the company, was talking about the sort of outlook, and the company has not necessarily been forthcoming, even as one European company after another was issuing profit warnings. For them to sort of drag their feet and only do so now when the writing maybe seemed to be on the wall, even when they were doing first half results. I think that's part of why you're seeing this negative reaction, because some are saying, how can we trust this management team, going forward, given the way they've messaged this?